Namaskar and welcome to episode number 24 of Understanding Consciousness podcast, the latest Sam Harris podcast episode. Is an interview with this physicist called Dr. Donald Hoffman, who has been working on the consciousness question, the hard problem of consciousness, from a different angle, from a physicist's angle, from the angle of okay, I'll tell you what the it's one of the most interesting, fascinating podcast episodes I have heard, and it's a 2.5 hour long episode with Sam Harris and his wife Anaka Harris interviewing Donald Hoffman about his ideas in what consciousness actually is. And according to him, consciousness is like workspace. It's like a desktop. It's like a computer interface or a virtual reality interface is the closest thing to what he means, in the sense that it's not there to tell you the truth. What you perceive about the world is not the way the world actually is. It's not in our best interest to know how the world actually is, strictly based on survival, the fitness. And that's the starting point. The world is not what it seems, and it's actually not even. It's not like it's almost like that. It's almost what it seems, but not really. It's the fact is, according to him, is that it actively hides reality from us. Our consciousness, our conscious perception actively hides the truth, actively, as in it distorts the truth in order for us to um, understand it. It's an interface. An interface like a desktop does not show you the reality of the file system. It's not like the files are arranged in an array. It's not like the files when you the recycle bin is an actual bin, and if you put stuff in it, it'll the whole system. We know that. We know all this. We use such kind of an idea of an interface all the time in our lives, and consciousness is one of those. And there are many examples he tells us where this makes a lot of sense. All the optical illusions, all the all the misfirings of conscious perception, where one of the beetles mistakes the beer bottles as the female of the species, much more so than the actual female of the species. So the male chooses the bottle over the female almost all the time, and that caused them to go extinct almost. The Australians had to change the beer bottle. That's an Australian story. They had to change the beer bottles to cause them to really get on with it again. And that's a very interesting example because it tells us that it's not a necessity that what consciousness tells us is it's the best for us in every moment. It's not the reality. What conscious perception is the current best case version of the world, a prediction of the world. All right, that's the idea. That's the question. That's the state. and you'll see, okay, what's that doing with what's that have to do with um, understanding consciousness. He goes on to tell us that space, time, and causality are all illusions, are all just the property of this interface. And it's just mind boggling to me. This concept is boggling my mind. I have heard this podcast many times, not many times, like probably 2 3 times right now. It's just been out a couple of days ago. But he talks about the fact that space and time itself is just a construction of our perception of the world. It's not how reality is. There is no reason to think that that's how reality is. And the equations also kind of say that. And when he says that, he talks about it in a very mathematical term. He doesn't talk about it in a mathematical term. He says that there is a big mathematical basis for what he's talking about. First of all, the evolutionary experiments that were done to explain the first point of this podcast, to explaining that consciousness goes away, conscious perception goes away from reality into fitness, which goes away from reality. It actively stops organisms from seeing reality, because that's not the fittest thing they can do. And that has been actually tested through simulations, where organisms that can see actual reality die out and cannot do better than organisms that only see what makes them better for survival. All right. But why space time? Why just take space and time with it, along with it? Why do that? Well, I don't know. And I'm really excited, but also scared, because this is something really new and interesting. He goes on to explain that consciousness is the fundamental starting point of his explanation. And from that starting point, he is going to model space, time, and all our physical theories accordingly. And if it cannot be derived from that starting point, if our current theories cannot be derived from that starting point, this operation fails. So the attempt here is to start from a new starting point, and not think of space and time as the start of our theories, but actually a result of this new theory, this new way of thinking. He's not trying to explain the he's not trying to establish an all encompassing theory of the universe. He says that it's not even possible. But more and more and more and more understanding is in fact possible. I'll tell you what, this goes against another genius physicist called David Deutsch, who came up with his own theory of everything. In his book called The Fabric of Reality, he says that his multi-part theory is actually can be considered one of the theories of everything. And subsequently, he has actually another book out. He has another book out called The Beginning of Infinity, which I have to read. I actually have to read both of them fully to understand what he means. I don't know. this is, frankly, all this thing is quite overwhelming for my teeny tiny brain. I'm not a physicist. I don't even understand space time completely. Um, I know it's a part of um, relativity, that space and time are combined together, and it kind of does feel it's fascinatingly interesting, because relativity also handles our point of view as a valid place to understand what we are seeing. Your point of view is one of the most important things there. That's what the world relativity comes from. Whatever is happening in the world is relative to your position. Um, some people can confuse that with our consciously looking at the things in order to figure out, you know what I'm saying. It's all very confusing, and I find it hard to talk about without completely confusing myself and the listener. And I frankly am out of my depth here. Um, and yesterday's podcast was completely different from today's podcast, and now I'm wavering between the two paths forward, and I'm not sure which one to take. And frankly, this is why I started this podcast. Everything else has been going smooth since the start. Not smooth, but it was still manageable. But right now, I feel naked and alone in this vast field of theories and mathematics and statistics. You know what I need to understand is mathematics. I need to get comfortable with mathematics. That's what is required of me, um, to understand all these things. And well, I am up for the task, but I need some guidance. I need someone. I It would be amazing if I can bring someone on this podcast who is an expert in, at least in physics or in statistics or in the neurosciences. Someone who can help me with the technical stuff. Um, all right. After that big, questionable, questionable. What's that? What's the word I'm looking for? Questionable. Screw it. Screw it. See you tomorrow. I'm done. I'm done.